Baker's Honey Farm. If you're new to watching, I post new videos every Sunday, Monday, and Friday on beekeeping, organic gardening, permaculture, backyard chickens, quail, and all things related to those things. I wanted to share several books on my bookshelf that have been really helpful for me in the past few years getting into beekeeping. And some of these books are not about like the practical application of any tools or equipment, and I'll kind of explain why I find them really helpful when we get to them. Uh, I'm going to get the first one out of the way that's regionally specific, and the rest are all, for any area. But this book is A History of Honey in Georgia and the Carolinas. So this is specific to the southeast part of the United States. So I'm located in central area of North Carolina in the Piedmont, and this book has some really cool history. It mentions some honey wine makers and different things that are unique to our area, which is interesting to me because these are places that I've either been to or that I can go to, and it has this kind of local connection. So that's the only region specific one. And this is Bee Journal, and I just ordered this a few months ago, and it's by Sean Borrowdale, and it's a book of poetry by an author in Somerset, England. And I was looking for books about bee poetry because I do write poems that are themed around honeybees, and on the back of my 1-pound honey jars, I have a series of poems, and I add new ones each year. So I was curious if there are other people doing it. I'm also working on a manuscript of bee-themed poetry, so I wanted to see what's already been done and how I can make sure my book is unique. And so that's what I got this one for research. And it's truly just, it almost feels like if you keep notes on your hives, it's as if someone just took line breaks in random places. Like it's very, and some of it's kind of prose-like and a little bit more dense. But it's as if someone just published their bee journal. Like it doesn't feel highly poetic to me. There are some pieces that are, but maybe my bee journals are just kind of poetic and I don't know it. But I can recognize and feel familiar with it, but I'm not sure anyone who's not familiar with bees would have the same connection to this work. But it's a great book in the sense that I can see another beekeeper's perspective on the kind of documentation and seasonality of beekeeping. And my friend was living in England for a few years ago, and she sent me this book by Orrin Fox, and it's called Do Beekeeping: The Secret to Happy Honeybees. And I think from when I researched this years ago, there's like a series of books. Yeah, it's the Do Book Company. So I think they have a series of topics, and so this is the one on beekeeping. And this was, you'd think that like everything's already been written about beekeeping, but there's always something to learn. And I found going through this book, the graphics in it and the photos, there's illustrations, and it's just really interesting to see from another country an approach to beekeeping, because you don't really, some things you're like, oh, I guess I could do that here, or something may not be a popular practice. And that's what's really nice about it, is because it makes you think about something that's familiar to you in a new and different way. And this book, I love it so much. And this is by Hillary Kearney. And she is the Girl Next Door, and that's her Girl Next Door Honey. That's her brand name, and she has Instagram and beekeeping school online and in person. She's based out of the San Diego, California area, and I've been following her on social media for years. And she published this book, and there's a kind of a little graphic of her on the back. She published this, and it's just, she's a wonderful photographer and an artist, and she has educational pieces in here, but also it's just pictures of frames, and you have to find the queen. And some of them fold out, I feel like this is like an adult Where's Waldo, or it's just like a beekeeper focused Where's Waldo. And I do not get tired of this. I could just pull this out, and if we're going, you know, on a road trip, and I don't, you know, going in the car, it's a lot easier to bring a lot of books. And I could just search for queens in here all the time. And what's nice is in the back of the book, she has a legend. So you can, if you're having trouble finding the queen, because they are, some of them are really easy and some are very challenging, that you can always go back and see. And I find that it must on some level improve my ability to find the queen when I'm in the hives, because you really start to know what to look for. So I highly recommend this. This is Queen Spotting, and she has a bunch of other books and pollinator card games and puzzles, really cute greeting cards and t-shirts, and it's just, wow. I'm just always impressed by everything she puts out. And this is The Complete Guide to Beekeeping by Roger Morse. I found it at a used bookstore here in our town. And again, you know, you'd think everything's been written about beekeeping, but I love going through this and, you know, learning about swarm capture and different equipment use. What I liked about this book is that it isn't for any particular level of beekeeper. You know, you can come into it having never owned bees before, and this is going to make sense to you. And you can also have years of experience, and I don't have decades of experience, but after having a few years of experience and reading this, you're still learning stuff. It's really great when you find resources like that. And I've got a classic here, Langstroth's Hive and the Honeybee, from our father of the Langstroth hive. And what an interesting life. I won't really go off on a tangent about his life, but if you Google his biography, it's kind of dark. It's interesting. So I really, of course, can't say enough about this. This is like every beekeeper has either read this or they own it, or they want to, or they should on all those levels, because it is so comprehensive, and it's just a staple here. And it's something that I can pick up anytime and, you know, either remind myself of something or learn something new, even though I have read it before. All right, and this is First Lessons in Beekeeping, and it's by Camille Dadant, so part of that Dadant family of equipment, and I hope I'm pronouncing it right, or is it Dadant? I always see their brand name everywhere, I just haven't heard anyone say it out loud. And I got this at a bookstore while we were traveling somewhere, and I was like, oh, this is great. I don't have this book yet. I probably will learn something, and I did, and it was just really good to have while traveling, because it's, you know, nice and thin. Well, it's pretty comparably thin, but there's a lot packed in here, and I highly recommend it. And when I took, got just a few more left here, when I took our local Chatham County Beekeeping School back in 2017, I got this book, and it was required reading. I think it was either included with our course fee. It was, you know, bundled up in the price. So this, I would say it's maybe not organized in the sequence that was most helpful to me, having never owned bees when I took the class and not knowing anything about them at all. It was a complete fresh slate. I find that this book jumps around a lot, and it's not for a brand new beekeeper, although it's First Lessons in Beekeeping. And this is by Keith Delaplane. And I'm not sure if it is the sequence of the book. It's a little dense in ways, and maybe more verbose than it really has to be. So I felt like I had to really concentrate to get through this, and I haven't looked at it in a few years, which is also saying something. Like, I've kept it because I know that there's been valuable information in it, but it's not a book that I pull off the shelf a lot, because I haven't in all those years. Let's see. All right, so this is If Bees Are Few, and it's a book of bee poems by all different authors, from classic, historic poets to contemporary writers. And what's really nice is that they're in alphabetical order, so you kind of get a mix of, classic voices with modern perspectives too. And, some of the poems are written in such an old form of English that I would, if I really wanted to understand them, I would have to really dissect them. But maybe, I don't, not to turn anyone away from this, like there was just maybe 3 poems in this book that were like that. The rest are, I can just read one after the other. And again, like in my research for looking for books about bee poetry to see what's out there, that's why I purchased this, and I really, really love it. And this is really interesting. As part of my search for books related to bees and poetry, this book also mixes science into it too. So this is Listening to the Bees by Mark L. Winston and Renee Sarajini Sekliakar. Hopefully I'm saying that right. And this is co-author between a scientist and a poet. So there are essays on the science of beekeeping interspersed with these scientifically themed, bee-themed poems. So it's a really nice balance of education and then almost like a little breath of poetry, and then into some more cerebral writing. Highly recommend. I'm only a quarter of the way through this. I've been kind of picking it up in between reading some other books. And similarly with the other book of poetry, this I'm just about halfway through. And awesome, both of them are. So my last book is actually 3 books. I'm just going to feature an author, a beekeeper, with this. So my neighbor found this book at a used bookstore, and she's right on the side of my property where the apiary is. And she and her husband, are really, I guess good, proponents of pollinators, and they plant pollinator plants, and they're always curious about the bees. So she found this, and it's a book of bees by Sue Hubble, and it's Sue Hubble's memoir as a beekeeper in the Ozarks of Missouri. And I could not put this book down when she gave it to me, and I was reading it in the spring a few years ago while we were out in the mountains of North Carolina, and I was totally entranced with a section in here about her capturing a swarm. And I had never caught a swarm before, I had never seen one before, and I just kept rereading it, and I'm like, I have to be prepared soon because it's swarm season here. And we decided to come home from the mountains a day early, and I went out to check the hives, and everything looked great. And then I came back over to the house, and my neighbor, who had given me this book, called me a few minutes later, and she's like, your hives are swarming, they're going in the tree. So that was the first time I knew about my hive swarming and that I caught a swarm. And I felt so prepared for having read Sue Hubble's account of that in here. And her writing is just really, really introspective, and you get a really genuine, unique look into her life, operating over 300 hives. That just blows my mind. And she did that on her own after she and her husband had gotten divorced, and they had been operating it together, but she did that on her own. So her other books, this one I'm just slowly reading, is On This Hilltop, and she had written a column for a newspaper, plus she had other pieces published in papers. So this is a collection of her columns about her life as a beekeeper, and just in general, beyond beekeeping. So I like these because I can just pick it up and read one of her columns because they're not too long, so it's not like a huge commitment, and I can read a bunch. And this one I am almost done. It's a country year, and Sue Hubble wrote this the year after she got divorced, kind of like how she's rebuilding her life and just finding her place among her bees and in her land out in Missouri. So these are some books that I recommend on beekeeping. Curious if you have any recommendations. I'd love to hear about them. And please comment below and let me know what you're reading.